time, and we got a lot to cover today, so we're going to just jump right on in. So again, my name is David Dodge. I use he and him pronouns. I'm the executive editor of Gays with Kids, and today we're doing our Choosing a Path webinar, where we're going to explore all your different options for becoming a dad as a gay, bi, or trans man. So this was actually, when we started doing these webinars, one of the first that we developed, just to give people a really high level overview in 30 minutes of some very complicated processes in paths to parenthood that are available to queer men interested in becoming dads. And these include surrogacy, adoption, foster care, and co-parenting. So this overview is intended to give you just that. It's going to be a quick little taste of each of these paths to parenthood to give everyone an understanding of some of the advantages of each, some of the challenges, some of the costs involved, the time length, all of that good stuff. I'm very excited to be joined by the experts you see on screen here, which I will be introducing them in just a second. But I also like to just take a second at the beginning of these webinars, in case this is the first time you've interacted with us at Gays with Kids, to give you a little understanding as who we are and why we're doing this. So we are now over 7 years old. We got started mostly as a place to try to highlight really inspiring, loving gay families, and to show other gay men that are interested in fatherhood that it's possible for them too. So we started profiling as many gay men that we could find that have children, and we started an Instagram account that blew up very quickly. Turns out that people love pictures of adorable gay men and their kids. But over the years, as we've been kind of increasing the visibility of queer parenthood, we've kind of, without necessarily meaning to, become the largest resource and magazine for gay, bi, and trans dads. And over the last several years, we started hearing more and more from our followers that, visibility is great and it is incredibly important, and we're very excited to continue to do that. But we also started to hear from people that they wanted more help with how to navigate these processes to parenthood, which are not simple, none of them, which you already know, or you wouldn't be on this webinar to learn more about them. So the paths that are available to us, namely foster care, adoption, surrogacy, and co-parenting, each of these come with a lot of challenges. None of them happen overnight. They involve experts, such as the ones you'll hear from today. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible, and it doesn't mean that it can't be as simple as possible. And so we really wanted to become the place where you can come to explore each of these paths and to figure out which is the right path for you, down to what agency you're going to go with, what expert you're going to pair with. And as you'll hear from our experts here today, this isn't a small question when it comes to becoming a dad as a queer person. The partners that you choose to work with matter. They are not all created equal. A lot of them have an amazing track record working with our community, and again, are not just LGBTQ accepting, but very affirming, and make it a part of their business plans and their models to be working with our community. All of the people that we've chosen to work with do exactly that. We couldn't recommend them and their services more, and their expertise. So we've been, over the course of the last year and a half, slowly rolling out tons of new webinars and videos and expert opinions and articles that help you kind of wrap your mind around each of these processes. And so we're excited to continue doing that today. So this is, again, our overview webinar. It tends to be one of our more popular ones because it gives you a little taste of each of the paths that are available to you. So it's one of my favorite to facilitate, because it also we get to bring together experts from across the different LGBTQ parenting landscape. And so we'll be getting into this in just a second. So I'll say, before I start to hand it over to our panelists, that we will be, rushing things a little bit in order to get through as much of this as possible. So if you have a question that occurs to you, we're going to be spending the first 30 minutes really presenting and getting into each of these paths. But feel free to use the Q&A function of the Zoom screen at the top or bottom, or if you're joining us on Facebook Live, feel free to chat us a question there. I'll be amassing the questions over the course of the 30-minute presentation, and we'll get through as many of them as possible. So I will also say, for each of these paths, we have developed a multi-part webinar series that's going to go into every single one of these questions in a lot more detail. So if you haven't seen those yet, I do encourage you to go to our website, gayswithkids.com, check out our new resource page, where you can get a lot more information about a lot of this stuff. But again, we have our experts live with you here today, so feel free to ask these as well here. If we're not able to get to your question for any reason, I'll repeat this email several times, but please do email us at dads@gayswithkids.com. Our experts are eager to help answer any questions that we're not able to get to, or not able to fully answer here on today's webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to just quickly introduce our panelists. I'm going to let them give a better introduction when we get to each of their paths. But we're joined today by Jay and Danny Cook-Wong, who are the co-founders and co-owners of Same Love Surrogacy. Molly Rampe Thomas, who's the founder and adoption assessor of Choice Network, and Rita Soronen, who's the CEO and president of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. So, and I've already kind of given the spiel, but just quickly, we're going to be going over each of these 4 paths to parenthood. Again, foster care, adoption, co-parenting, and surrogacy. We're going to talk about the considerations that you really need to be thinking about up front before plunging into any of these paths. We'll talk about the advantages to each, some of the challenges, and then we're also going to leave you with some next steps. So if you have an idea of which path you want to learn more about, we'll leave you with some great resources and ways to do that. So this is just a beautiful slide that shows these paths one more time. I think we've gone over this enough. And so I'm actually excited to hand it over to our first couple of experts who are going to walk us through surrogacy and some of the considerations there. So again, as you're having questions, please do feel free to start asking them via the Q&A function, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of this about 30-minute presentation. Jay and Danny, without further ado.
So thanks so much, David, for that introduction. First of all, Danny and I, we have been together, hard to believe, coming up on 25 years this coming Saturday. So we always knew that we wanted to have kids. And, you know, we looked at these other options as well when we were first looking into it. And, you know, that we had a lot of roadblocks. There were a lot of issues. I think things are certainly better now. And the other presenters will kind of talk about that aspect of it. But for us, we ended up choosing to go the route of surrogacy, and there were a lot of benefits as to why we wanted to do that. You know, one, it's obviously there's a biological connection to your child, and you know, you create quite a bond with your surrogate and
donor,
with your egg donor, and also the people that you're working with, not only the agency, but there's so many people involved in terms of the legal team, in terms of the IVF clinic, the doctor, the nurses, the surrogate coordinators, all of those people that are involved in the process. You know, it's great. There's a lot of positive benefits to it. There's very little legal risk in terms of, you know, your child, that is your child. You're the biological parent of that child. So things are a little bit more guaranteed. Of course, there's certainly some challenges and some difficulties with the process as well. One being is it's much more costly. So the cost in terms of doing surrogacy can be very challenging. And so some people have to save for a very long time or take out loans to be able to do this. But at the end of the day, even when we went through it, because, you know, I always thought when we were younger, wow, this is only for movie stars and people who are super wealthy who can do this. And, you know, we set a goal and we just started saving, and we were really able to do it. It took a while, but, and now looking back, you know, I think it was the best thing I ever did. You know, some of the sacrifices that we had to make financially just made such an incredible difference now, because now I don't even think about it. I mean, our kids are our entire world. They're turning 7 next month. And so I couldn't imagine life without them. It's changed everything. So it's been really great and positive. The overall cost can be anywhere from about $135,000 to $200,000. So yes, that is expensive. But again, I've always thought, you know, if you just set a goal, if you have a goal, there's a way to make things happen. There's a way to get help. There's
financing, and there's also the GPAP program from the Men Having Baby. And
yeah, there's lots of different avenues. So, and overall, the time frame is on average about 18 to 24 months from beginning to end, just depending on a lot of factors. How fast you want to go, if you're financially ready, the availability of surrogates, how long it takes you to choose a donor that's going to be right for you. So that's just kind of a very, very, very quick overview. I know we're on a little bit of a time limit, so I don't want to take up too much time, and I will wait for more questions afterwards, and then we'll move on.
That was great. Thank you so much. So again, these are 5-minute overviews of very complicated processes. So if you're still overwhelmed and confused, I do not blame you. But please do start to ask your questions now, and we'll get to as many as we can very soon. Okay, so now I'm going to let Molly take it over for adoption.
Hi, everybody. Yes, again, David, also thank you for my introduction. I really appreciate it. So yeah, I'm just here to talk to you guys about adoption. So I would say surrogacy and adoption do look very different. The benefits though are that, you do, with adoption, adoption is a great way to create family as well. And as, Jay was talking about, also you get that connection to the birth family. So I think, the biggest thing when you are choosing adoption is that you are choosing to bring this person that you choose to carry, or to this person that chooses you, sorry, the person that chooses you, you're bringing them into your life. So, the national statistic is 80% of women choose open adoptions, and I would say it's closer to 95%. It's just really important that if you're choosing adoption, that you know that you are choosing a path that really centers the birth mother, but still can be a beautiful way to create your family. Again, adoption can be expensive. The national average is $42,000. I know we have an average down there as well, but that is the national average. It's less than surrogacy, but there's other things that can be added to it too. So depending on the agency that you work with, there can be fees for failed adoptions. The expenses can add up. Again, adoption is a birth parent driven process. And so that just means that honestly, the best agencies from beginning to end have the birth parent drive the process. That means that they are first offered all options in their pregnancy, that they then second are choosing the family, that they're choosing the amount of time they want to be with them, that they're being supported along the way, and then also that we're honoring them in that open adoption, in an open adoption relationship. The waiting period, the home study process itself can take anywhere from 2 to 4 months. And then what people are saying, the national average now is 2+ years to wait for adoption. But my agency, it's a year or less. So it really honestly depends. Right now, we do have down here 6 to 17 months for permanent adoption. And I think that's after your home study goes live. But that seems like a pretty good estimate, I would say too.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to move on to foster care, and we're going to hear from Rita from the Dave Thomas Foundation.
Great, thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you, David. Look, we are all in favor. We're the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. So adoption is what this is all about, but there's a particular kind of adoption that is foster care. Children who come into foster care through no fault of their own, they've been abused or abandoned or neglected and need either temporary care, because our job when a child comes into foster care is to see if we can make sure that the home in which they were born can be made safe and they can go back and thrive. That's where children deserve to be, is in their family of origin. But for right now in this country, 122,000 children, those homes could not be safe. Their case wound through courts and child welfare systems to the point that the family was permanently terminated from the child and no longer has any legal right to that child. And what we've created are essentially 122,000 legal orphans in foster care. Those children are anywhere in age from birth to 18 years old, but the average age is around 8 in foster care waiting to be adopted. And if you choose to step into this system, it's sometimes a good idea to really look at becoming a foster parent first, to learn what it's like to work with a public or private agency that's holding essentially custody of these children and trying to determine what's best for this child, go home or be permanently freed for adoption. So that option of becoming a temporary parent exists, and now more than ever during the pandemic. We had a loss of a lot of foster parents for a lot of reasons, for the obvious reasons. And now as schools begin to open and children are identified again as abused or neglected, we believe that states will experience a sort of a rush of children into the foster care system. So now more than ever, we need those people who are interested in providing a temporary safe haven for children. It can be challenging because you get attached to these children and your job is to work to get them home. But if you keep in mind that you might be one of those best adult connections that that child has had in a while. That permanent connection, at least sort of psychologically, stays with that child. But the next step is to think about adopting a child from foster care. Again, the challenges are that they tend to be older children. We need homes for older children, for sibling groups, for children with special needs, and they bring with them some of those challenges, of course, as a parent to think about how to support that child. But also they come with the joys of, there may be some of you who aren't interested in diapers and infants and midnight feedings and might be willing to think about an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old that's ready for a permanent life. The challenge is they've experienced lots of trauma, right? The trauma of abuse and neglect, the trauma of grief and loss, of being separated from their family of origin. Many of these children have been in care for years, and so they've moved multiple times, and they may not attach very quickly. But the reality is that you will be providing permanency for these children, and with patience and with care and with loving support, they become the best kind of family that you could think of. The cost is one of the advantages here, and I always hate saying that because we don't want to devalue these lives. It's not that they're any less valuable, but because they're in the state or county custody, they tend to cover the majority of these costs. You do have to go through that same process that Molly talked about, a home study, a background check, to make sure that you can care for this child. And it can take anywhere from, yes, about 6 to 18 months to move into a permanent adoption. There's training that's required, of course, but supports follow the foster care path, both financial supports and psychological supports. And for all the adoptions that we talk about, there are benefits like the adoption tax credit, both state and federal adoption tax credits. For children who are adopted out of foster care, the majority have subsidies that follow them until they're 18. There tend to be state-based education benefits as well for many of our states. So it can be complex. You're dealing with government systems, and we know that that can be challenging, but I think the value of thinking about helping a child in incredible need is one of those things that I hope that everybody can think about too, as they're deciding, which one of these courses is best for them.
Thank you so much, Rita. Okay, so I've become kind of our resident co-parenting expert, so I will give the spiel here. Just to give a little bit of background on what this is. So I am a known donor to a lesbian couple, some very good friends of mine. And we have entered in something of a parenting partnership, intentional parenting, platonic situation. So this is becoming a much more common way for LGBTQ people to form their families, either a gay couple and a lesbian couple, maybe a single gay man and a lesbian couple, like in my instance. But so this is something that just purely by the number of people reaching out to me to talk about this is it's becoming a much more common thing. And I think it'll actually a generation from now be a very common way for a lot of queer people to be forming their families. So it too, like surrogacy, allows for a biological connection to your child, if that's something that's important and interesting to you. And again, this is kind of, we're used to being at the forefront of family planning, queer people generally. And this is no different. It's something that's becoming even more common within heterosexual couples as well. And it's just speaking from experience, it's a really fantastic way to parent and to be involved in the lives of children, to share the quote unquote burden and responsibilities and joy across multiple people. We always say it takes a village to raise a family, and this is just a very intentional way of doing that. And it's something that, again, there aren't a ton of resources and organizations out there yet, or experts that are specifically working on intentional co-parenting, which is also sometimes called parenting partnerships. But we are trying to develop these resources now. This is the last area that we're hoping to have a webinar series where we'll go into the details of this a lot more as to how these partnerships are formed and some considerations there. It does not come without a lot of challenges. So because this is very much at the forefront of family planning, the legal landscape has not caught up. And this is probably true across all of these paths to parenthood that are available to queer men. Often the law does not reflect how queer people build their families. And this is certainly true for people in these sorts of arrangements. So for instance, oftentimes most states will not allow more than 2 legal parents to be tied to a child. So you might be in a situation where you want to make sure that 3 or even more people have that legal protection. And that's not always going to be possible. Slowly, this is starting to change. States like California and Maine have passed laws that explicitly allow for 3 legal parents or more to be tied to a single child. And so we're hoping to see more of this happen over the course of the next generation. But as of now, depending on where you live, if you're entering into a partnership with more than 2 people, it's something that you have to consider, that you may or may not have legal ties to that child. It's also, the more cooks in the kitchen, the more difficult it can be as parents. So I think that the flip side of that is that you can share responsibilities across multiple people, and it has a lot of benefits. It allows you to focus on your career or your marriage or whatever else in your life that is important to you when you can split the responsibilities across multiple people. But you also have to come up with a style of parenting that's going to fit more than just 2 people, which can be a challenge. So the finances involved with this really does depend on your insurance, whether you have it or not, and also just the legal fees that you're going to need to consider when coming up with a contract. So there's nothing requiring you to come up with a contract to enter a parenting partnership, but you will not find a lawyer out there that will suggest that you don't do this. And it's a little bit challenging because these legal contracts, in most instances, again, because states are so slow to catch up to how we're forming our families, aren't necessarily binding. So you can spend all this time putting in explicit detail how things should happen in the case of a divorce or a breakup between your partnership. And a judge can decide what they're going to decide. So this is increasingly not happening, and judges, if you do have something in writing that is that's very well thought out and intentional, judges are more likely to consider it in the event of some sort of dispute than not. But it is important to know that it's not a foolproof situation, that judges will decide what's best for the best interest of the child. So that said, this is something that can take, I would say, depending on how long that will take you. So for me and my friends, we took 9 months of sitting and meeting almost on a weekly basis to talk about every aspect of this, every different type of eventuality that could come up for us, to make sure that we were really comfortable taking on and making sure that this was actually going to work and be a good fit. So that might take you less time, it might take you more, but other than that, really, it's just the process of getting pregnant. But the legal process can be a long one. And it's, again, even if the contract itself is not going to be foolproof in court, it is something that is an incredibly important process to go through. And it's really just the process of sitting down with your friends and acquaintances and figuring out if this is something that's going to work for you. So this is becoming such a popular thing that there's now matchmaking sites online that will pair people that are interested in entering parenting partnerships with other people. And I will just say from personal experience that the most important thing to consider if you're going to be going down this path is that you need to trust these people that you're entering a partnership with thoroughly. So that's not to say you can't get to that place with a stranger, but these are people that are going to be in your life for the rest of your life, and you want to make sure that you're going into and to make sure that you're keeping in mind that there are going to be children at the other end of this. So are you bringing children into a situation that is going to be good for them and good for you, and hopefully strong throughout the course of the whole partnership? Okay, so with that, again, that was a very quick crash course in family building via 4 very complicated pathways. So I'm actually going to take us off screen share so we can see each other during the Q&A. But so yeah, for this part, we have a good over 30 minutes. Thank you everyone for being so succinct in your presentation. So I will just say before we jump in, again, if we have tons of great resources on each of these paths that we've developed. We have a whole webinar series that go into the costs associated with each of these pathways, a lot of the other different considerations that were just lightly touched on. So at the end of this, I'll definitely keep directing you back to our website so you can take a look at some of those. But in the meantime, we already have some great questions coming in. So we're just going to jump in and get through as many as we can. Again, if we can't answer it completely or thoroughly enough, please do email us at dads@gayswithkids.com. Our experts are going to be more than happy to figure out the answer if we don't have it for you now, or if we can't get to it today. Okay, so the first one, and we get this a lot on the subject of surrogacy. Someone is wondering just if you're interested in having twins, if you're a gay couple and you're interested in surrogacy, this is obviously a big question for you, is whose sperm source to use. Actually, and I'll just throw into this mix. So we get this question a lot as to whether you can mix the sperm together and just kind of do like a Russian roulette, kind of like see who ends up being the biological father. So if you want to talk about why that's not so much the case anymore, that that's not something that is done, and then also what some of the options are for people that both want to have a biological connection to a child and have a twins pregnancy or multiple children. Jay and Denny.
So yeah, the answer to the question is yes, you can have twins with each of the biological father donating their sperm. And so matter of fact, that's what Danny and I did. So
Those are twins.
those are our boys. So I'm the biological father of one, Danny is of the other. We had an Asian egg donor, so we have one all Asian son and one who's half white, half Asian. So yes, that can be done. Also, part of the question is, what are some things to consider? The main thing to consider in this aspect is twins itself. There's a high percentage of premature births when it comes to twins. So you're taking on a much higher medical risk. I don't think we were really aware of how high the risks were when we went through the initial process. In this time, I've kind of learned that there's a 30% chance that there's going to be a significant premature birth, and that's a pretty high risk. Had I known that, I may have considered doing 2 separate journeys. But that's definitely the one thing to consider. But it is possible. We are still doing it, and
well, it's a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
right.
But also now some IVF clinic or even an agency doesn't even do twins. So you may have to also ask and approach them to see if they actually will consider that or not. But some of them will outright say no, and some of them will. So just something to also consider.
Yeah, it does seem like it's something that in the industry was much more common probably when you two first became parents. Twins pregnancies weren't as discouraged as they are now. But yeah, again, it's obviously possible if that's something that's important to you, but it does seem like there's just a lot more thought process going into talking with intended parents about some of the risks involved, and obviously with the surrogates as well, to make sure that that's something that everyone's on board with. So this is a related question to this. So if you want multiple children, what are the costs? And I know that every agency is a little bit different here, but if you could talk about how it works at Same Love. But if you want a second, third, or fourth child via surrogacy as well, is it the same cost each time going in? Or if you could just talk about the range of how agencies tend to handle it.
Sure. It is definitely a lower cost because you have already created your embryos, and that's a large aspect of the cost itself. It's about $45,000 by the time you pay the donor, the legal fees, the medical fees to create your embryos. So once that's done, you have them, they're good and they're viable, they're frozen, so they're able to be used. Again, so that is a large cost savings. What you have to consider in a second and or third pregnancy is you're still paying a full compensation to a surrogate. So that could average around $50,000 to $60,000. You're paying the IVF clinic to actually
Just doing the transfer.
clear the surrogate, do the embryo transfer, do the medical aspects of it, thaw the embryo. And then, yes, the legals. So usually the clinics, that is around $6,000. Legal, again, a lot of times if you're using the same attorneys, you're using the same escrow, the same agency, you're gonna get discounts because you've already done it once. We give a 25% discount off of our agency fee for a sibling journey. So there's things to consider to help lower those costs. So in a sense, on average, a journey is going to be around 150 the first time. The second time, you're looking at maybe 80 to 100. So
great. And I have a friend doing this right now, actually, where some agencies will do a dual surrogacy journey. They'll stagger it slightly, right? So both dads can be doing biological parenthood at the same time, but with separate surrogates.
Yes, as a safety realm way of going about it, instead of doing twins, yes. And we do that as well. We also give a $5,000 discount on our agency fee for the second surrogate as well. So we try to help out in that manner also.
Great. Okay, so this next question I'm going to bring both Molly and Rita in on because it's a good one. So it's the question is specifically about Molly, you mentioning that that adoption is a birth parent driven process. So I'm actually wondering if you can just expand on what you mean by that a little bit more, and why that's an important thing for people entering the adoption world to understand. But the second part of this is about whether that is also true of adopting older children. So Rita, I'll have you just talk a little bit more about what that process is like.
Yeah, so, one thing that Rita, I love the stat that she gave of 122,000 children of looking for homes. And the difference really in infant adoption is there are 36 waiting couples to every one infant available for adoption. So where there are children waiting in the system, it does look very different from the infant adoption standpoint. And so that's why actually it's a birth parent driven process, because, frankly, there's tons of waiting families and there's very few, only 1% of women are choosing adoption. And so really that's why she really gets to choose. And also the research shows closed adoption was harmful to women, children, families, communities. And so the best agencies are doing everything they can, just essentially the opposite of closed adoption and opening up in any way they can. I mean, honestly, when David and Jay, when they're talking about their surrogates and even the partnership to parenthood, it feels a little bit like that. It's like you're welcoming her into your village. That is the best way that adoption can be done. It's the biggest gift that we can give to our child. And so it does look different than the foster care system, although I know Rita can talk about that. Even the foster care system is opening up, and that when it's safe, maybe a mother can't actually parent a child, but still that connection and that tie to their biological family still remains important, as long as it's safe for them.
Exactly. So Rita, if you could talk specifically about whether kind of the role of birth families in adopting through foster care and fostering just generally, that would be great, so people understand the difference there a little bit.
Yeah, and it's a great question, because there's sort of the bottom line. An adoptive parent from the foster care system is that legal parent, and they determine what's best for the child. And if they say we want no contact with the birth family, then that's what that parent is allowed to say. But there are the nuances there, of course, depending on the age that the child is when they're adopted. They know and remember family, right, from a very young age, and it may be best. There are extended family members that are absolutely safe and valuable to this child. Look, we're all homing pigeons at heart. We identify with where we were born, how we were born, the community in which we were born. So it is frequently in the best interest of the child to make sure that those connections remain strong, but it is absolutely up to the adoptive parent to decide. When it comes to fostering, that's a whole different situation, because the job of the foster parent is to work to make sure that this child can safely go home. So there are interactions with the family. It is guided by the agency, of course, and the intervention of the social workers that are involved. But birth family is absolutely a part of a foster child and a foster placement. It may or may not be. And it's up to everyone to determine what's best and safest for this child, knowing that, quite honestly, even when children are 18 and age out of care, they haven't been adopted, the first place they tend to go is back home where they came from. So keeping that in mind, I think, is important as you look to determine whether or not you will keep biological family involved as well.
And Rita, they also talked about age, and I think that's an important part to bring up too, that the average age for kids who are legally available for adoption is 8.
8, yeah,
right?
8, yeah.
So sometimes people are saying like, oh, we don't need an infant, but we could do like 2 or 3, and that's just honestly not very realistic. It can happen. It can happen in the foster care system, but again, the foster care system's job is reunification with the biological family. And so as you can understand, that takes time for that to happen. So if the foster care system doesn't want families who are yearning for infants really to enter into the foster care system, that your heart really should be on bringing home that older child.
Yeah, or the reality is the younger children are part of a sibling group.
Yeah,
so you may be looking at a sibling group of 2 or 3, or you may be looking at an infant and a teen parent. Those situations exist as well. Absolutely. It's a good point, Mom.
So, I mean, there's obviously a lot of differences between going the foster care route or the domestic infant adoption route. But this age of the child is definitely one of them. And so for, taking the time to really kind of figure out what's important to you, whether it is important to be parenting from birth, or if you're open to, or maybe that's not interesting to you, or maybe you're more willing or interested in adopting. I'll give a plug for this amazing webinar we did last month for National Foster Care Awareness Month, where Rita was on board with a couple of former foster youth who had aged out of the system. And really help kind of put it into perspective, the experiences of older youth in the foster care system, I think, which is not something that a lot of people approaching the system maybe are intentionally looking for. But so they gave us some incredible stats, like 50% or plus, depending on the city, of youth in the foster care system actually identify as LGBTQ. So I think this is a particularly interesting thing for those of us in the queer community to be taking note of, that this is, a grouping of young people that's very much a part of our community. Anyway, so go check out that if you're interested in foster care, especially if you have questions about adopting or fostering older youth. That was a really fantastic conversation. Okay, so actually this next one I think is, and this is similar, we're getting a question from our Facebook stream about the idea of having a closed, it's specific to having a closed donor in a surrogacy journey. So I think, and this is actually, it parallels very closely with some of the conversations we just had in an adoption. And it's something that I think each of you can talk about a little bit about what this this move away from having very closed situations in the donors and the birth parents, and basically in every situation possible. There's been really kind of a movement away from this. And so I'm wondering if you could talk, Jane and Danny, just a little bit about what that looks like, and for people that are, for queer men, obviously we need to be working with some sort of a donor, whether it's an embryo donor or an egg donor. So can you talk just what about like the considerations for those interested in having more of a closed arrangement versus an open one in that situation, and how you've seen that change over the course of your careers?
Sure. Yeah, it absolutely used to be more closed and everything was private. But today, with facial technology, facial recognition, all of the ancestry, the DNA, all of those things, it's just really hard to become completely anonymous. And so we do encourage that our donors be open. I think about 99% of our donors are open, and they actually meet. We actually schedule meetings. So we do Zoom meetings with our intended parents and potential donors. And so that has really changed. When we went through the process ourselves, our donor was actually anonymous, but we did put into the contract that if and when our children were older and they wanted to meet her, that she would be willing to do that. And she agreed to that. I didn't want to take that away from my child and not have them ever know who their biological mother was if they seek her out one day. So I wanted to give that to them. And, she did agree to it. So every situation's a little bit different, but definitely there is more of a movement to at least be open.
Yeah, at least meeting the intended parent and maybe not having something after that. But we're always pushing them.
So, and what have you seen as kind of the range of experiences? I mean, just from the families that we've profiled over the years, it seems like there's quite a range. Sometimes surrogates and egg donors end up being incredibly close to the family that they've helped. Other times, maybe it's like a photo once or twice a year or something like that. But yeah, what do you kind of see as the typical range in surrogacy?
So for donors, there's definitely a little bit less contact from what I've seen, although I do have some who are Facebook friends and, they even get together and they're very close. But that's probably maybe only 10%. I would say the majority tend to initially meet, and then they may eventually, when the kids are much older, and we haven't really gotten to that stage yet, but when the kids become like teenagers and or adults, I think that's more when they're going to try to seek out the donors as much. So the surrogate, she doesn't necessarily have a DNA or biological connection, but I do see that there's a lot more involvement with the surrogate and the families. There are always sending photos. We even send our surrogate, we still send her photos and pictures and communicate with her. And our kids are turning 7. So you definitely do build a relationship. You would not have been able to create your family without these amazing women. So, we're in favor of having everything be as open and communicative as possible.
We're always pushing that. So.
And this, I mean, it's what is so fascinating about our paths that are available to us is that they all, by their nature, involve other people, and that can make it part of the challenge. But it's also, I think, part of what makes each of these processes so fascinating and potentially very enriching. So Molly, I'm wondering if you could also talk about the range that you've seen in terms of openness and adoptions with birth parents.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about it a little bit before, but the national average, I think, is 85% of women want open adoptions, but ours is closer to 100%. Even if a woman says that she believes she wants a more closed adoption, she almost always opens up, especially after the delivery. So I would say, and then that range can look anywhere from, I think our most common relationship is a texting relationship, sort of like what Jay was describing, the same thing, sending pictures and updates. And then it can go all the way to visits. the birth mother. And so yeah, it's a range, and it's sort of like I always say, we're colliding two worlds and creating family together, and so it can look different, and just being open to like really whatever it is that she's willing to give that you want to take for your child.
Great. And so Rita, you've also touched on this a little bit, and I think that foster care is unique in that these other processes, these are conversations that these experts are going to walk you through at the outset, right? You're not going to have these questions sprung on you halfway down your process or your journey to fatherhood here. But foster care, it's a little bit more out of your hands potentially. So if you could talk about just the range of experiences you've seen with foster parents, both who become permanent adoptive foster parents and also those that just provide homes temporarily with birth families.
Yeah, and I think there's always a recognition that so many adults surround these children in foster care, from attorneys to judges to guardians ad litem and social workers, and you name it. They are surrounded by adults. But sometimes the most effective role models in their lives are former foster parents, are those CASA volunteers, those people that really have a vested interest in their well-being, but may not be with them permanently, but do stay with them, do stay connected to them. And the more of those, I think, adult positive connections in their lives, the better. And those are the people that they will go to. Look, there was a point in the whole foster care adoptive experience where social workers, a child was removed from a family because of abuse or neglect, and that family was completely disregarded. The extended family, grandparents, cousins, everyone was excluded from that child's life because of the apple doesn't fall far from the tree adage. That has changed so significantly over the past couple of decades that we want family involved. We want children to go, if they can't go back to their parents, then can they go to grandparents? Can they go to an older brother? Can they go to an uncle? Can they go somewhere else that still maintains that family connection? So it's been a changing circumference of adults that surround these children and to their benefit. But yes, there are always these ongoing positive connections that have surrounded these children that may not be the adoptive parents, but are still good for the child.
Great. Okay, so this next question could potentially, we have a whole webinar on this one. So again, I'll direct people to go check out this a little bit, but this is within adoption and foster care. Parents that are going through these processes must go through the home study, which just in my experience seems to terrify people the most. It sounds very scary or potentially very invasive. And I think to some extent it can be, but also I think it's a very enriching experience for most people that I hear from that go through it. So Molly, I'm wondering if you could just walk us through, give us like a bird's eye view of what the home study entails and what people can expect.
Yes. So we just usually say that the home study is sort of, and we break it into three parts. One is documents, the second is training, and then the final is time with the adoption assessor. So documents include copies of marriage license, birth certificate, social security cards, and then documents also can include medical, physical background, or physicals from your doctors, fire inspections of your home, reference letters, financial documents. So, to give your finances and tax returns and things like that. And then full background checks. And then the training, I think that's probably the biggest difference between foster care and adoption. With foster care, there's a lot more required training than there is with infant adoption. Not that it should be that way, but it is. The requirement is usually a lot more. Like for us, I think there actually is no requirement, but our families are doing about 15 hours of training, where in foster care, I think it's probably closer to around 30.
And so, well, actually, yeah, Rita, what would you add to that for folks going through the foster care system?
Yeah. It's very similar. There is that required training. It can feel invasive. I think the difference that we look at in foster care is there's a perception that it has to be, you have to own your own home. You have to be a two-parent family, and nothing could be farther from the truth. You don't have to own your home. You don't have to have a high income. You simply have to be able to take care of this child while they're in your home. If it's a foster care situation, if it's a permanent adoptive situation, that you're committed to this permanency. The the challenge will be, we're all waiting for a Supreme Court ruling. There are some private agencies that don't necessarily think that a same-sex couple, for example, is a good fit for a child, or may not want to serve LGBTQ families. I think it's incumbent on those that are marching in to look and say, you know, look at and ask those questions. Hopefully we can all be pleased with the Supreme Court ruling that doesn't provide a license to discriminate to agencies.
Yeah, very glad that you mentioned that. We should be expecting that at any point this month. So within surrogacy, it's interesting because so for folks, if you're in a same-sex couple relationship, and one of you is biologically connected to the child and the other is not, I know that legal experts still recommend that you go through what's called a second parent adoption process. So I'm wondering if you guys can talk a little bit about what that looks like. And I know it varies state to state. We can get into a little bit of the discussion there, but to shore up your legal ties to your child if you're not the bio parent, can you talk a little bit about what you kind of coach people through for that?
Yeah, so we see it pretty rarely, actually, because we try to work with states where the laws are a little bit more flexible. Like in California, we have some of the best laws in the world for surrogacy. But there are a few places where surrogacy is legal, but you do have to go through a second parent adoption. And the attorneys help with that, who are doing the parental rights portion of the surrogacy, the pre-birth orders, and those kind of things. So if it is in a state where a second parent adoption has to be done, they will help set that up. They will help do the applications for that. And there are sometimes you have to do the home studies and you have to do all of these additional things similar to like adoption and fostering. So it is similar, but it's definitely doable. It just takes a little extra time, and there's a small extra cost involved in doing it. And again, it varies and differs from state to state.
But I tend to avoid.
Yeah, on average, I think we've probably only ever had to do 3 or 4 of them in our history. So we don't have to. We really don't see it very often where it needs to be done.
And so you touch on an interesting point, which is geography. So depending on the route you choose, geography will be more or less important. But so why don't we just go through quickly because one of the benefits of surrogacy and working with a surrogacy agency in particular is exactly what you're touching on here. So you know the states where it's going to be best to be working in. The states aren't all created equally. And it really doesn't matter where you are in the country. It matters more where your surrogate is and where your agency and fertility clinic are, right? So can you talk about, like, you work with people all over the country and world, but just to the extent that geography factors into what people should be thinking about.
Right, and like you said, it doesn't matter where the intended parents live. They can live in a state where surrogacy is illegal. It doesn't matter, as long as their surrogate doesn't live in that state and deliver in that state. That's what's most important. You can do surrogacy in pretty much all of the states in the United States except for 3, Louisiana, Nebraska, and Michigan, where I'm from, ironically, is absolutely a no-go pretty much for surrogacy. They have very poor laws on the books, and the state could actually take your child away. So we would never, ever have an arrangement where that we would take that risk. So we're very careful at looking at the laws in each state and what is and is not required. And there are some states that are a little, it's legal, but the laws aren't quite as great. And so there's some things that you have to take into consideration. Some states, such as Utah is an example. If you're single, you cannot go through that process. But if you're married, you can, and there's no issue with surrogacy. Even if you're gay and you're married, you can go through the process and there's no issue. Seems a little strange, but if you're single, then absolutely you cannot. So each state has its own little nuances, but that's what we're aware of. That's what we kind of filter, and we talk about that with our intended parents too. And when we're looking at what surrogates we have available in what areas, and whether they want the surrogate close to them or they want it in a state where perhaps the compensation's a little bit lower, so it helps them financially. Or some states, the insurance is a little bit better, and surrogates tend to have their own insurance that covers surrogacy. And so that's also a large cost savings in the factor. So there's a lot of things that factor into this. So we work with our intended parents to find out, what's really important in terms of location, what the laws are, and how that impacts the journey overall.
and this, it seems to be one of the nice advantages to pursuing surrogacy is that really you can work with an agency and a fertility clinic anywhere in the country. It allows you to find the right match and to find the professionals that you really want to work with. And this is also can be true for domestic infant adoption. So Choice also works nationally, so it does not matter where you are in the country if you work with Choice. So can you talk a little bit about how that works and how much geography plays into the adoption process for domestic infant adoption, Molly? You're on mute.
Sorry.
No worries.
So yeah, you actually just need to get a home study in your state. So I work with families from all over, but they have to be licensed by an agency in their state. So I'm actually located in Ohio. So Ohio families, I can home study, but families outside of the state then can share their home study with me and use me to help them sort of from the journey from beginning to end. So I think that's probably many agencies. I actually just answered a question about how to choose an agency, and HRC has the most inclusive list of agencies. Anyone who has their seal of approval is a great place to start. So you can choose one agency as sort of your home agency, but then choose someone more broad to actually be the person with you throughout the match and the process.
Great. And I'm glad you mentioned All Children's, All Family. That it's a fantastic resource. They really have taken this work off of our plate. They do a very extensive vetting process of the adoption and foster care agencies they work with. And actually, Molly, maybe you could just give a very quick overview of what HRC asks of the. It's not just slapping the rainbow on your logo during Pride Month. They actually do put you through a pretty rigorous process to make sure that you're affirming and inclusive. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it takes us a couple of months to get our seal of approval. It's really important to us to have it. We have the highest level, the innovative level, and I believe that Rita, that you guys do too. But the seal of approval process, we have to do a series of trainings. We have to show that our marketing materials, our websites are inclusive and affirming. Just sort of, we show examples of our social media. So I think those are places to look. You just want to you want to see families who look like you on the agency's websites. But I honestly tell families all of the time that to me, the HRC seal of approval is bottom line. I would not work with anyone who does not have that seal. And I know there's great agencies out there that don't have it. I'm talking about specifically infant adoption, but these are the agencies who took the extra step to show that they're affirming and inclusive.
We couldn't agree more at GWK. So there are no shortage of adoption agencies to work with, like Molly said, but those that are taking the time to really make sure that they're working with experts that know how to be affirming and inclusive, which HRC definitely is absolutely, I think, a bare minimum way to go about your exploration when you're looking for an adoption agency to work with. So foster care is a little bit different in that the Dave Thomas Foundation does not do adoptions themselves, but they work with adoption agencies all over the country. And so this is the one path where we're talking about where geography really does matter. It's a very hyper-local process. So I'm wondering, Rita, if you could just talk a little bit about geography and how it plays into the foster care system.
Yeah, it's super local. I mean, there are times when children are placed across state borders, but it's rare. Frequently, it's because of a family situation or there's just a special kind of foster family that can take care of the needs of this child in another state. So it's very local. And it's this combination of either state-based or county-based government agencies or private agencies with whom the county or the state contracts. And that's a mix of faith-based organizations and other private agencies. What we do, because we are a grant-making organization and we contract with hundreds of agencies through one of our signature programs, is they simply have to sign our non-discrimination statement or we won't provide funding. And it's a very inclusive non-discrimination statement. So that's one of those things to look at. If you are in a state, you're in a county-based system and you want to deal with the agencies in your county, simply ask to see their non-discrimination statement, ask to see, what is their policy on working with gay men or couples or all kinds of gender identities. And it's important to be transparent and to ask and to step aside from an agency that doesn't seem to answer those questions or fill the needs.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left. I think we can get to both of these last remaining questions here. So I'm going to start with the second one because it'll be a little bit more involved, and we've touched on this within foster care and adoption a little bit. But the question is about how much you see discrimination within your respective specialties. This is a great question, especially for Pride Month. So I'm wondering if let's start with surrogacy though. So how is this? How does it manifest? Does it manifest? Like, are surrogates screened on based on how they view LGBTQ community, et cetera? So how do you see discrimination play out, if at all, within surrogacy?
So for our agency, we're a little unique because we're a gay owned and operated agency, and we're very publicly known as that worldwide.
Right,
so,
there, same love, right?
Right. So we have surrogates who actually seek us out because they prefer to work with a gay couple versus a heterosexual couple, and maybe a woman who can't have her own child, and maybe sometimes women who are caring for other women. There's a little tension there. So we don't see very often where we get a lot of discrimination because people just won't come to us if they don't want to be involved with a gay couple,
agency,
or a surrogate who doesn't want to, work with a gay couple. Oddly, we do occasionally get a few surrogates who prefer to work with a heterosexual couple and do not want to work with a gay couple. It's very unusual, but we have had that. It always surprises me when they request that because I'm like, well, then why did you come to a gay agency? We even have it on our application that you will most likely be matched with a gay couple because, that is the community that we serve. But again, it's pretty rare just because of, we're very open about it. And so
when it sounds like, but well before they are ever placed with a surrogate that might have that preference, you will obviously not be matching, so that as intended parents entering this process, you will not ever interact with that surrogate, for instance.
Correct. We do a thorough job of what everybody's looking for on the surrogate side of things, also on the intended parent side of things. And we internally do a matching process prior to ever just throwing surrogates in front of our intended parents. We give them individual profiles that we've already looked at and said, okay, this would be a good match. We're certainly not going to match somebody who are polar opposite and looking for two different things, because it's just looking for a disaster to happen if you do that.
So Molly, I'm wondering within domestic infant adoption, if you could talk just a little bit about the risks of being paired with a birth family that might have homophobic views, or just anyone else in the process, social workers doing home studies, like how often does...
I think, again, it's a birth parent driven process, so they're choosing you. And many of our women are actually looking for the non-traditional families. So our gay families are chosen really at a quicker rate than our more traditional families. And secondly, yes, there are, again, that's why HRC site I think is so important. One, there are only 1 in every 4 adoption agencies will serve lesbian and gay couples. So that's why it's so important to be using resources like Gays with Kids or HRC to find agencies that you trust. There's judges sometimes that we just have to, be careful in court what judges we're getting. And but we partner with legal teams that are also inclusive and affirming. And I think the best agencies are doing that too. So yes, definitely there are, risks involved. But, and also I would just say, like, as far as our families, when our women are choosing them, if they believe that someone in their family is homophobic, they're not going to connect you with them. So they're super protective of our adoptive families as well. So, yeah, I think that our adoptive families are protective of them and they're protective of the adoptive families. So I think we can find it within the system, but you're not going to find it in that match.
Right. And so Rita alluded to a pending Supreme Court case that we're going to have decided at some point during June. So already 11 states across the country have passed bills that make it legal to discriminate against LGBTQ foster and adoptive parents by state-funded, taxpayer-funded child welfare agencies, which is not great. So this has gotten to the place where it's at the Supreme Court. They heard this case last fall. And with the new 6-3 conservative majority on the court, a lot of people don't think that this is going to go in our direction, which will mean that more states might start to pass these sorts of laws. So I think what's important for people to know is not ideal, not great. Progress is slow, but that this isn't going to make adoption and foster care by queer people illegal. It'll still be illegal in every state. But this is why it's so important to be working with affirming agencies, foster care agencies, and adoption agencies in particular, in that you won't have to go through the experience of being discriminated against. If you're working with HRC vetted and GWK vetted agencies and foster care agencies, from the outset. But so Rita, if you can just talk a little bit about, from your experience, where this manifests discrimination, how you see it manifest, if at all.
Yeah, unfortunately, it manifests in all facets. We heard the story on the last webinar of a young lady who had been placed with a family, who shared with the family that she had a girlfriend and that foster family kicked her out. So it happens to the children. It happens at even with the best of screening. People's beliefs, unfortunately, set in and impact children and families in this system. So I think it's just law and practice are one thing, but when it gets down to the individual level, that's where we see too much of it, unfortunately.
Absolutely. I do think that's an important point, is that foster youth are probably going to be experiencing this discrimination at much higher rates. Again, they make up a huge percentage of foster youth, especially older foster youth in the country, which is why it's so important for more LGBTQ people to become certified foster parents, to be providing loving, accepting, understanding homes to these kids. So we could be talking about this stuff for another hour, I'm sure. I am impressed that we got through every single question except for the last one, which is that do people ever mix and match these processes? And the answer is yes. Our co-founders, Brian and Ferd, actually are dads through adoption and surrogacy. So this is obviously you don't have to just do one. And we do encourage, so I'm actually going to just right now put in the links to where you can learn more about each of these three partners. Again, we can't recommend getting to know them enough and to learn more about them. These are organizations that we have personally vetted and feel very comfortable working with. And so we hope that you will as well. So just very quickly, if y'all want to just give a quick sign off and let people know a little bit more about where they might be able to find you. Let's start with Jane Denny.
So for us, our website is www.samelovesurrogacy.com. And we have all of our information on our website. There's lots of information that you can find us and connect with us and email us or call us.
Great. Molly.
And my website is choicenetworkadoptions.com. You can email me at molly@choicenetworkadoptions.com too. As I said, we're not accepting new families right now, but I'm still always happy to talk to families and brainstorm other agencies to go to.
And again, with foster care, it is a local process. You're going to have to work with your local, state, or county. But Rita, if you could just talk a little bit more about where people can learn more about Dave Thomas Foundation. Again, I put links to where we have more information on our site, so definitely check that out first. Go ahead, Rita.
Sure. DaveThomasFoundation.org. And on that website, we've got one page that lists all of the agencies that we currently work with and links to those agencies as well. So, and we're happy we've got a beginner's guide to adoption that folks can download on the website. So all kinds of resources. Certainly welcome to reach out to me directly, Rita_Soronen at DaveThomasFoundation.org.
So you can see all of these faces and all sorts of great videos and resources that we've been rolling out over the course of the last 6 months to a year. So go to GaysWithKids.com, go to our Become a Dad section. You can learn more about all of these questions. We just completed a really fantastic webinar series on foster care, which is all up on our site now. And we're about to relaunch our webinar series on both surrogacy and domestic infant adoption. So please stay tuned. Look for information about that on our social media and on our website. Again, we'll go through in a lot more detail a lot of these questions over the course of the next summer. And happy Pride Month, everyone. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you on a webinar very soon.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.